Live. Okay, so I'm live. Thank you very much for joining me. It is Wednesday. It is the 12th. And what I'm going to be covering today is how you can use loops and libraries, patterns, mostly patterns in the case of what I have here, MIDI patterns, to create authentic music, right? So as a composer, it's very, very important to me personally, and I think probably to a lot of people who watch this channel, it's very important that our music is authentic, that we enjoy it, that it inspires us, we feel compelled to write it, right? We don't want to just be engineers kind of gluing loops together. So that's part of what I'm addressing today is how can you keep it interesting and fresh and actually inspiring musically? But also, how can you leverage really high quality libraries towards this goal? What are some of the tricks? What things do you need to do in your DAW? And what things actually have to be built into the library? I'm hoping to illuminate all of that. So this is going to be very helpful for anybody who, like me, is composing large quantities of music on a regular basis and maybe interfacing styles that you're not that familiar with. In the case of my demo today, I've written this piece of music that is, I would call it salsa. I'm not a proficient Latin music sort of expert by any means. I'm trying to do my best, and I know that there's a lot to learn here. So part of what I'm bringing to it is a great respect for what the music is. I have been studying the rhythms and studying how my instruments work with those rhythms. And that brings me to the first of 5 principles that I want to really share and sort of put forth in this video. The first is make sure you buy quality instruments, VST instruments, okay? Everything I'm doing here is MIDI loops and sampled instruments, but make sure you buy quality because usually quality libraries hire quality players to play these loops. In the case of the piano that I'm using here, which is coming from EZKeys Salsa, and I'm not sponsored by or anything like that, or even endorsing any of the plugins that I use. I'm just sharing with you what I do. But they hired a really great expert piano player to record the loops, and that's why their loops sound better. That's why their patterns sound really good, because they are actually played by a human being who knows what this music should sound like. So that's the first step. That's the first thing to do. Make sure you get high quality libraries. The second thing you want to do is really dive in and learn how those libraries work. So I've spent a lot of time with the main libraries I'm using here are EZKeys for piano. I'm using Groove Agent 5, the full version from Steinberg, for percussion and drums. And then I'm also using Upright Bass, which is from Native Instruments. It's one of their session bassist instruments. I've learned all 3 of these instruments quite deeply. I'm always studying them more, but it's been a big investment. So I say, make sure that you actually invest the time to learn the instrument. A great high quality VST instrument is going to hire great players. They're going to mic up with great mics through great preamps in great rooms. They're going to record, they're going to be informed about, in the case of Latin music, they're going to be informed about little nuances like record this in 2/3 and then record it in 3/2. And things like that then give you, as the composer, the tools that you need to actually write music that's going to be high quality if you learn how they work. Now, another extension of that is learn how your DAW works. You're going to see that I'm using automation. And you're going to see that that actually is a key to injecting dynamics and real life qualities into this, aside from having used patterns that are literally MIDI patterns recorded by great live players. Okay. Now, the third thing that you want to really focus on, which I just mentioned, is automation. Automation is a key to using existing loops, particularly MIDI loops, and making them sound fresh and lively in your composition, being able to build composition entirely from MIDI loops without it sounding static. Now, I'm going to show you in Groove Agent 5 how I use automation and just how key that is. But essentially, Groove Agent, one of the things I love about it, and the reason I rely on it often, is that it has very close integration as far as automation goes with Cubase, which is my DAW of choice. But beyond that, it also just exposes many of its parameters via automation, which means that I can increase or reduce the complexity of a drum pattern with a simple automation, for example. I can create rhythmic offsets with a simple automation. And that means that I can actually write automation through the course of my piece and inject a lot of unpredictability. I can change the dynamics. I can change the timing and all those sorts of things. So again, this harks back to my first point about getting quality, really high quality instruments. Then they'll do things like expose a valuable number of their parameters via automation. Automation is absolutely key to what I've done here, and I think you'll see that in just a minute. The fourth thing is that when you're working with MIDI loops or you're using audio loops, rhythm is king. Rhythm is more important than anything. So using, as you'll see me doing here, using a groove quantize is very helpful. Understanding in your DAW how you can actually create a quantized standard from an existing groove, from say a MIDI clip or from an audio clip, how you can do that to really sink in and get your rhythm in the pocket. That's where live players are so incredibly valuable, is that a human being just makes these adjustments on the fly in real time, and a great musician does that very elegantly to produce music that's going to be sounding fantastic. So rhythm is key. If you're listening to your MIDI loops and you're unsatisfied, you're thinking they don't sound good, but you know that they're high quality, right? And you know how they work. And you are using things like automation to inject life in them, and they still don't sound good. The thing to do is look at your rhythm, and I'm going to be walking you through at least how that works in Cubase. I use quantizing, but I build a quantized template off of something in my piece that has a rhythm so that things begin to fall in place. So that's the fourth really important thing. And then the final thing is expression and dynamics. This is really a final step that'll just put the composition over the top, kind of get it to the point where for the vast majority of people it's indistinguishable from the real thing. Expression, simple expression, volume expression, the equivalent of writing faders in your mix. Expression where the instrument allows it, if it's a string library, for example, where you can fluctuate the vibrato or something like that. Those little changes can really bring loops and patterns to life as well. I think it's the final stage, but it's not something to be overlooked. So if you're doing all of these 5 things, you bought high quality libraries, you learned how to use them, you're using automation throughout the piece, you've locked in your rhythms and paid very close attention to that, and then you also put on this expression at the last minute, I am confident that you'll find with your libraries, you're able to use patterns and assemble them. The first time you do this, it might be very time consuming. As you get better and better at it, obviously it takes less and less time. And you'll learn a lot in the process. With this, I learned a lot, and I still have a lot to learn about Latin styles and salsa for sure, but I learned a lot in just trying to compose this. So let me go through the demo and show you again these 5 steps and how I've applied them here, okay? So we're going to start off looking at, well, let's start off by just playing a small portion of this. Okay, so what's going on here? Let's start with the percussion. I've got Groove Agent 5 here open. And Groove Agent's got this magnificent, the full version has this magnificent percussion library. And I chose a preset. And one of the things that I really love about it is that you can mix and match different instruments that have different rhythms. So you can actually take, you'll have a variety of bongo patterns that you could mix with a variety of claves or congas and so on and so forth. I really like that. And I love the fact that it has these complexity sliders and intensity sliders. So essentially when I'm listening to, if I increase the complexity of my clave, you can hear, let's go ahead and go to a portion of my project where there is no audio. So I'll bring it over here. I'm going to do follow transport. So you can hear my clave. And if I bring up the complexity to 5, it just gets slightly more complicated, but let's do the same thing. That's because the clave is doing something very simple. Let's go with the congas. on complexity 1, so I love being able to change these sliders. These are things I can automate. If I right-click on them, I can say Assign to New Automation. And then, because of its close integration with Cubase, you'll see under here an automation lane open up. If I right-click again, after I've selected Add Automation, I can say Show the Complexity Automation track, and you'll see that it pops it up right here. So now I've got an automation track that will automate that. I'll get into the automation very shortly. It did take a lot of time for me to learn how the percussion libraries worked in here, what this sort of set of sliders do, how Groove Offset works. Groove Offset is a fantastic tool. So these things took me a fair amount of time to learn and understand. I often will, after I create a loop that I like, I'll drag the MIDI actually into Cubase, as simple as just dragging the pad, and then I get that. This is the pattern that I came up with right here, and this is just MIDI from Groove Agent from this little button here. You just grab that, drag MIDI pattern to host sequencer. Works like a charm. And then the time that I spent learning this, was significant, but now within minutes, literally, I can create very convincing drum tracks, and not just for Latin percussion grooves, but for rock grooves, for scoring, that sort of larger-than-life damage type sound as well. All right, so then let's talk about automation, right? So I automated this complexity slider on the congas. So I'm going to come back into Cubase here. I find that automation right here. And let's say that I were to just, over the course of my intro, I were to say that since you can actually see this little switch up here changing, since it's 5 settings, the automation only allows me to change those settings. So you don't create a ramp is my point. So let's go ahead and just create this. And I'm going to just create at random some automation here. And what's going to happen over time is that as I play this back, you're going to see the slider change. And as it changes, I'm getting a slightly different version of that conga playing. And that's what a live player would do. So using automation in that way. I'm also using it on the intensity slider here. So you'll see that the intensity slider is changing as well, I believe. I have... It's not playing back right now, but I think that may be because I dragged in a new pattern and started some new automation. But I automated intensity here, complexity. You can see different forms of complexity. And being able to automate these means that over the course of my track, the drums are not always staying static. That really helps a lot to keep things sounding lively. All right, so let's talk next about rhythm being king. Rhythm is absolutely king, but what do I mean by that, and how do we work with that? What I like to do, certainly with styles like this where the rhythms are very complex, but really in every style, because I want to start with high quality MIDI clips that were actually played by real people. In this case, these are percussion instruments played by real people. Quite often I have drum libraries where it's drum parts being played by real people, or in the case of the piano in this, it's being played by real people, it's recorded. So they've got a rhythm, and of course we all know that what makes a piece of music sound human rather than robotic is that it's got good timing, sure, but it's not right on the grid. It's not locked right on the grid. Those piano keys, when the pianist plays a chord, not all of the notes get played at exactly the same time. They're a little bit offset from one another. And those are the variations that we get in a nice MIDI loop from a quality provider. But we can also extrapolate that rhythm, extract it, and place it onto other things. So let's look at how I might do that. Let's say that I've got this rhythm here, and I put this piano part on there. So let's look at a piano example. I'm using EZKeys 2 in this example. So I've got, let's say I like this part right there. Bring that down the volume a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag that into my DAW here. And I'm going to go up to, let me clean this screen up a little bit. I'm going to go up to my rhythm part. I'm going to go up to this, let's say, well, let's pair this up here. So I've got the piano part I just dragged in over this groove here, groove number 8. So this was dragged verbatim right out of Groove Agent. And if I open it up in my key editor, we can certainly see that, put it on 16ths, we can see that most of these notes are not right on the line, right? And it would be a nightmare for me to go through the piano part and try to fit all of this together. That would be an absolute nightmare. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a groove quantize from this. So right now when I quantize here with these settings, this is quantizing on a very strict grid. But if I go ahead, and I'm sorry for the quickness of that screen, if I go ahead and open up what's called the quantize panel, many DAWs offer something similar. I can actually drag MIDI in here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close this window, and I'm going to find where I had put that. So we've got this groove here. I'm actually just literally grab this and drag it in. You can see that it shows up right here. I'm going to drop it, and it's creating this groove. It names the quantize appropriately. I could even save it as a preset if I want. And I'm turning on this thing called soft quantize, or sometimes it's called iterative quantize. What that's going to do is it's going to improve the quantization by 60%. So it's not going to lock it 100%. I prefer this. I think it gets a more lifelike feel. So what I have now is a quantize setting that I can quantize things to that's based on this MIDI groove right here. So I'm going to come down to my EZKeys piano, and I've got that groove selected here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply the quantize, and we're going to see that the notes change slightly, not a lot. It improved them by 60%, and now when I play these two together, we're going to hear that they groove a lot better together. So let me select this, and now sometimes when I bring in MIDI, you'll notice that or if you do this as well, you'll notice that it brings in a tempo point. So sometimes that's not what I want. My tempo on this should be much faster than that. I'm going to go ahead and mute this timbale. So by quantizing it relative to what the drums were doing, rather than taking the drums and the piano and quantizing them to some sort of static number, I wind up with something that is much, much, much more realistic. Hey Rich, thank you very much for joining me. You ask, can you drag an audio loop onto that quantized window? I'm not 100% sure about that. I would have to look into that. I don't have some samples that I can pull up immediately to test that, but it may be the case that you can. So that would be worth looking into. I will actually look into that, because there are some times when I actually like to use audio loops instead of MIDI. And Cubase particularly does have some really powerful quantizing audio features built into it, so that could offer a path towards that. I'm not sure. Actually, let me see just if it's a quick thing. If I open up Media Bay and find some kind of audio clip in here. See if so if I bring in a loop, let's say, should be, it certainly has some rhythmic data in it. Yes, it says drop audio event or MIDI part. So I dropped that and it was able to calculate that. So how well it works would be something I would need to test, but that is really interesting that it does that. So it looks like you can do that from audio, at least in Cubase as well. So good to know, really good to know. So the final step, of course, is expression and dynamics. And so just using typical expression like CC, volume 7, expression 11, CC1 for dynamics, those sorts of expressions can add an awful lot to the final product if you've got high quality samples running through high quality instruments and you've tied down your rhythm and you've also got the automation in use. Then you sculpt some very slight expressive modifications in CC. Over top of these, you're going to be in really, really good shape. And I was very happy with what I wound up with here to begin with. I've got some automation here running on different intensities. This complexity slider that's changing over here. And the piano parts were all quantized to the drums. Let me just quickly talk about the bass here. The bass is a Native Instruments session instrument here, upright bass. And I just pulled up this cha-cha-cha preset, had 4 different patterns, very slightly different patterns. And they're triggered by these key switches C1 through D sharp 1. And I created a MIDI track down here that I called patterns, and it spits its MIDI into the upright bass. And I just created a MIDI part that had, this calls the A section with a key switch on C1. This one calls C sharp 1, so on and so forth. They call these loops A, B, C, and D. They're just sort of dumb MIDI notes that call these key switches, but it enables me to kind of arrange my piece, which was very efficient. And so I was able to, this isn't really automation, but I am using, these are actually played by a real human being, these instruments, or this bass. So these loops are tempo matched and they're really played by real people. So they sound much more realistic. There's a really nice feature in here where you can actually punch in your own rhythm as well. If there's, if you were trying to do like a 3-2 or a 2-3 clave and you wanted to punch that in here, you could do that. It's like a 3-2, let's say, would look like 1, the and of 2 and 4, and then on 2 and 3, something like that. And then it would come up with these patterns, which all would fit in relatively well like that. So this is a really high quality instrument that's been played well, recorded well, and also provides me with these important rhythmic tools. Yeah, I have not done it in Digital Performer, Rich, but I really like the workflow in Cubase, and over time it speaks again to learning your tools. I know that there are, I have good friends who make great music working in Ableton, and people who work in Logic, or people who work in Digital Performer, people who work in Pro Tools, and they're writing really great MIDI-based music. It really comes down to knowing your tool. Almost all of these modern DAWs, Reaper, Studio One, they have all the features that you really need, and a great composer who understands how this stuff works could sit down with any one of those DAWs and make really great music. But certain DAWs do have more efficiency in certain areas. And I really like the way that Cubase is set up. It's one of the reasons that I focus on using Hallion and Groove Agent and Backbone, is because they integrate their automation, for example, integrates very well with Cubase. I love the fact that you can go in and you can just right-click a knob or a slider somewhere in my instrument if it's made by Steinberg, and I can say, show me the automation track for that. And I don't have to go through and fiddle and create the automation track and tie it up correctly. It just creates it in Cubase for me. Really, really nice feature. Just checking out the comments here. Yeah, so being able to find a library, as Rich recommends here, finding libraries for the different instruments that really work for you. I was very pleased with the salsa piano lines in EZKeys 2 that I'm using here. Really liked the percussion in Groove Agent. Find the libraries that you like. I did start by looking at Cuba, which came with my complete package, and it's fairly good, but it wasn't good enough in my opinion. There were some useful rhythms in the Session Percussionist from Native Instruments, and also their West Africa had some great things, because a lot of this Central and South American Latin music, a lot of the rhythms stem from West African rhythms, so there was a lot there I could have used as well, but the instrumentation was a little different. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off topic. I do want to say there are great libraries out there. First, look at the ones you have, or ask people you know for recommendations, the best way to go, and then really learn them. There can be, obviously, as I'm sure we've all experienced, this temptation to just keep buying libraries, and there's always a library that's doing something new, especially these days. You know, oh, it's going to do the part with AI or something like that, and you think, oh gosh, it's going to groove quantize with AI, or I mean, I haven't actually seen that feature, but I'm sure it's coming, and it makes me think, oh, that's a tool I can't live without. But 9 times out of 10 you can. Probably you have a library that is really great for this right now. This is the first time I've ever used the salsa library in EZKeys. It's the first time I've ever used the upright bass, because it's the first time I've needed it. And so I looked to the libraries that I had, and I found stuff. So I recommend starting there. Really study the libraries, use automation, lock in your rhythms, and add that expression at the end. And I think you'll get really great results. So if you have any comments or questions on this topic, please do post in the comments. If you're watching this after the fact and you're new to the channel, please do like and subscribe. Liking the video really helps, and I would love it if you subscribed so that you'll get notifications about my future videos. And I will be back on Friday, and I'll see you guys with another live stream. Take care till then. Bye.